Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Stan Gunner. I'm the CEO and founder of Insane Forensics. Today, I'm here to talk to you about adventures in using ELK to keep the lights on. So here at Insane Forensics, we deal a lot with cybersecurity, mainly in the public sector and industrial sector and commercial clients. So today, I'm going to be sharing some of my experiences and lessons learned using ELK. So where our journey today begins is really with an understanding that industrial control systems really underpin life as we know it today. Everything from power to water to manufacturing to even making the COVID vaccine pharmaceutical. Everything is made today really by industrial control systems. They're within industrial control systems, you have different components. That are kind of, if you think of it as Legos, they're the Legos that make up the factory. So you have, those blocks they're called programmable logic controllers. They're little computers that sense what's going on in the environment and take some action, all the way up to Windows endpoints that tell those controllers what to do. Because the controllers are pretty basic, so they have to listen to something going on or to something telling them what to do. So this is all to say that our journey begins here. Our journey begins with the fact that life as we know it depends on these systems. Today, for this talk, we're going to be talking specifically on lessons learned in the power grid, kind of as an overview of what the power grid looks like for those that might not be power experts. We're not going to turn you into a power expert in 20 minutes, but this is kind of what you need to know to follow along. So power is generated. It could be nuclear, it could be, more renewable, geothermal or wind, but at some point it gets generated. That's block number one in this diagram. It then goes through a substation that gets it onto a transmission line. The substations, block number two, block number three is those big transmission lines you see going across, maybe when you're driving down the road. When it actually gets to your neighborhood, it goes through another substation that puts it into those smaller lines to actually distribute it into your house. Why I bring this up is both so you can be aware that some of the challenges of cybersecurity do vary, and some of the ways that you respond to cyber threats in these environments. Each of these areas is a little different, so you can have different challenges, and sometimes your analysis and your tool set that you need varies between the different areas. So as we've gotten more efficient and as we've moved more into technology, components are continuing to be computerized even more. So the picture you see here, wind farms are now actually run by iPads. So you can have an operator that sits in a control center, dozens of miles away, potentially controlling wind turbines from an iPad. That's one example. COVID has also forced, a lot more of those distance boundaries. It's forced companies to think, hey, how am I going to run this operation and make sure that all of my operators aren't getting sick and that I can make sure that, this process continues, because we need power, we need gas, we need water. So computerization has given us a lot of efficiency, but it's also started to introduce a lot of challenges. This is just three sectors that I'm going to use as an example today on this slide. So in power, there have been situations in Ukraine in 2015 and 2016. Their power system was hit allegedly by another nation state. In oil and gas, you have the same place. There was an event called Trisis and Triton that we'll talk about a little earlier that went after a safety system in a Middle Eastern oil refinery. A safety system is a computer that, like I was talking earlier with the sensor and actuator, a safety system takes a look at the environment and says, hey, this is vibrating too much, or maybe the radiation's too high here, and it'll take an action. So when you're talking about safety systems in oil and gas, you talk about computers that are literally helping keep the workers safe in that area and cause some pretty catastrophic conditions. In water, we'll talk about some scenarios, but in water, there has been insider threat. There was the Oldsmar case, which was a water system that got hacked. All the details aren't fully out, so it's hard to say what exactly happened then, but it was a water system to where someone found the ability to basically add more lye to the water, which can be somewhat dangerous. So while this computerization has been helpful, it has brought new challenges. With these new challenges has also come industrial focused malware. So it's not just people doing it these days. There are actually groups out there that are writing malware to do this. We've seen malware going against industrial processes since at least 2010. In 2010, there was an event called Stuxnet that a lot knows about, or a lot of people know about in the security community. But what happened it was an Iran nuclear enrichment program that their systems got attacked, and it attacked their ability to enrich uranium. In 2016, there was that case I talked about the Ukrainian power system, 2015 and 2016. And in 2017, there was that safety system case we talked about. On the right of this slide, you have the architecture now to where the top of that diagram is what is more traditional malware, while the bottom starts to get into industrial protocols. This is a shift of showing, hey, now attackers are taking traditional malware and starting to target them towards, or continuing to target them against industrial processes. It's not just malware that's doing it. So there also have been people in there. In 2000 in Maruchi Shire, there was a insider threat case where there was a disgruntled job applicant that went and manipulated a water system, all the way down to WannaCry, which shut down vehicle plants. WannaCry also shut down, at Chernobyl, it shut down the radiation monitoring incidentally. So you have cases to where there's malware and attack events that, even though they're not intended to shut down an industrial process, they do just because of that reliance on computers. This year, it was hard to miss Colonial Pipeline in the news, but it was the same way to where, billing systems and other systems that companies rely on to provide these services went down. Kind of the peak of the problem we're going to talk about today is the fact the industrial cybersecurity field has a visibility problem. And where I'm going to share a lot of my lessons learned and experience is the fact that Elastic really can help bridge this gap. And we'll dig into that in a little bit. A quote from Ann Neuberger, who's on the National Security Council. This quote was just from a few months ago. As she puts it, we don't have visibility into a lot of these systems. And, because of this, this is really dangerous because there's significant consequences if they fail, right? If you're talking about Chernobyl radiation monitoring, you really want that to work. Degraded also really matters because a lot of these systems and networks are time sensitive. So even if it doesn't have to completely fail for it to still be significant. From a cybersecurity perspective, we have to be able to have the tools to respond quickly to this at the depth that we need to. And that's where we brought Elastic in on this. So major challenges to this. When you get into visibility, a lot of these networks, there's proprietary protocol and technology. So these control systems are made by different vendors, GE, Emerson, Honeywell, a lot of big names you heard, and there's also a lot of other vendors. A lot of them have their own protocols and languages. So when you get into cyber events, you might be able to use traditional security tools, but you might also need kind of a translator, something that understands that other language or that protocol or technology to understand it. It's trickier in the industrial space too, because a lot of the major vendors have bought other companies, and so they've inherited the intellectual property from those companies. And so sometimes you'll actually have intellectual properties that came through acquisition. Because of these proprietary protocols, sometimes you get into low situational awareness because it's not just using protocols like HTTP or SSH or other things that are more well known. There's also a limited data source focus. A lot of tools are either just network focused or just host data focused. One of the big strengths of honestly using Elastic, and we'll talk about how we use like ElasticON and Scheme and other things, But when you take something like Elastic Common Schema and you push data into your ELK stack, you can begin to really overcome some of these challenges. Your collection complexity can vary. So in these environments, sometimes there are only certain points that you can listen to, or there's only certain procedures you're allowed to do, either for safety or for reliability of the process. Same way with adaptability. When you go into these environments, you have to have a toolkit that's able to adapt. One of the big things that we learned through this, and we'll talk about when we get to the on-prem versus cloud, um, is the ability to be adaptable, because regulation can change it. So some environments you might have to take a on-prem Elastic stack if you're using Elastic. In other environments, you can use Elastic Cloud and you can use the advantage of scale with that. But adaptability can be a huge challenge because a lot of tools might just be built for the cloud. And the nice thing that we've found is, you have to be able to blend between the two of those. There's a mix of older and newer technologies. So again, you have to be able to deal with some really old systems sometimes, and distance and technology barriers. When we get to timeliness, this is a big one, obviously in the security community, a lot of people hear about, but mean time to detection and mean time to response. Mean time to detection is how quick from the actual event to when you realize it happened. What's kind of that time delta, and mean time to response is then, okay, well, how long was it before you were able to do something to counteract or to neutralize what's going on? The thing to note in these cases is there can be significant consequences to time delay. So again, having that proper analysis stack is incredibly important. What I want you to leave today is Elastic, at least for us, and it can for you too. There is that connective tissue for analysis. So, when we talk about how we use Elasticsearch, we deal with extremely large data sets. And so one of kind of the differentiators that we've gotten into is, because data isn't always straightforward and sometimes data is encrypted. So if it's going over the network encrypted, you might have to rely more on host data, right? So Elasticsearch has been how we've been able to scale out extremely large analysis. We've had Elastic stacks with 50, 60 terabytes or more of data in them that we've been able to run very quick analytic batch jobs and other batch jobs on. Elastic allows you to scale the ability to comprehend that data. Because again, as we were saying, mean time to detection and mean time to response is important. You can't always just throw humans at it. And so the ability to bring a whole lot of data in quickly and then ask it questions and get responses back is incredibly important. When I talk about data granularity, so this is where we differ a little bit. So we kind of do the level to where it's like the log stash, hey, I have a process log. But the other area that we're working in is also dealing with raw evidence formats. So taking a raw disk image, taking a raw memory image, dealing with raw PCAP. Normally you would need a cocktail of tools for that. But what we've done is work through bringing that data in a lot more efficiently. Well, with that, your data granularity is going to increase because you're going a lot deeper. So you need to be able to deal with that. How we dealt with that was through Elasticsearch. The Kibana side, this is incredibly important because, like I said, and especially in mean time to detection and response, you have to be able to enable that human-driven analysis, and you need to be able to fuse that data together. Kibana, we'll show some screenshots later of how we use it, but it's been incredibly helpful and can save literally dozens to hundreds of hours, even in a single investigation. Elastic Cloud, like I was saying, sometimes it's regulated and you have to have all of your data on premise or handled certain ways. But what we've found is if you don't have to have that, the option of having Elastic Cloud to where the management is abstracted out into a service that has SLAs on the back end, that can be super helpful. So you can keep focusing on the analysis itself and not have to worry. Also scaling complexity, some of the ability to move that slider over and scale up your instance and not have to stand up new nodes and do a lot of overhead. There's incredible value for bringing that in. So data sources, like I said, we talked about Elastic being kind of that connective tissue. Data that we'll talk a little about, and I hit some of that. We break data kind of down into three basic areas. So there's process, network, and host data. This is a lot of data that you might get out of logs, right? The efficiency for network data, for process network data, is that you can efficiently analyze and store it. The con can be, if the traffic's actually encrypted, you're not going to see it. You'll only see the metadata. And protocol support, again, like I was saying, there's many different languages that are spoken in these networks. So sometimes you're either stuck with that metadata or you're out of luck otherwise. Process host data, a lot of this comes from endpoints, so EDR, XDR, all of the terms out of that. The pro is that it is non-network events. So when you're working through correlation, and we'll talk about correlation, that helps. The con is configuration and integrity. And then, like I was saying earlier, getting into raw and host, it's not filter limited, and there's a whole lot of value there because unlike process, network, and host data, there's a lot of opinions that are applied to what you get. Those opinions can be good, but also they can hurt you because you don't get the insights you need. So raw host and network data can overcome that. The con is you really do need that mature analysis pipeline to deal with that data. So the backdrop that I'm going to use to talk about our specific use was so there was something called MITRE ATT&CK, and what MITRE ATT&CK is a taxonomy of different different techniques that attackers can use to to carry out whatever their goals are. If you think of it, it's kind of a bingo card of different actions that an attacker does when they're performing their operation. Recently, there was a Triton evaluation. So we talked about that Middle Eastern safety scenario. So MITRE, which is a big think tank, they took that event and they actually tested a lot of the detection market against it. They tested both network and host logs. So some of the data I'm going to show is from this event. They did run it on real hardware or real equipment in a lab. But where we'll see is really the importance of what we call data diversity, right? So throughout that MITRE ATT&CK eval, there were different things that the vendors were supposed to detect. One example is here, you have a adversary initiated program performing one of those protocol operations against two assets. I'm not going to get too deep into the details on this, but just know that the high level on this is that this is looking basically at the characteristics of different communications, some of that metadata stuff. But to find like this very specific event, some of the challenges is you need network and host data, like we were saying. So when we talk about that process network data, process host data, and raw, process network data, again, if you speak the proprietary language of that protocol, you're going to see it. If you don't speak that, you might be stuck with Windows event logs if you're dealing with process host data. And that's something you can pull through Logstash, or, if you don't even, if you're not even processing those, you might be able, or you might have to do it out of the packet capture. A challenge here is network visibility might be limited to do that encryption. And that raw data is going to require processing to get into if the protocol is not known. So again, when we look at the data we could use here, this is some examples, and I put a few tools here. So that program upload action, which is just one of the protocol options you might see there, you might pull that out of Wireshark or out of a PCAP. The process host, like I said, you might pull out of the Windows event logs. The raw host and network data, you might pull out of the raw PCAP or if you have a file on disk, pull the file off disk. But something that's important to note, and something that we definitely learned as we were going through this, is the entire chain of attack matters. You're probably going to struggle to find every step, and there's steps that you won't find on their own. But you do still need to find enough discrete events in each phase and avoid the red herrings. This is where your analysis stack really happens, because you have to be ready to deal with a lot of different attacker approaches for how they're attacking your network. Joining disparate attack phases, this is a good example where it's important. This is another phase in that MITRE eval to where there actually wasn't any network data present. It was all on host data. So again, if you're just manually going through this analysis and you're not using something like Elastic with the data that's pulled in, if you're just looking at network, you're going to totally miss this chain of events. Detection was only possible with endpoint monitoring in this case. So you have to be able to correlate host techniques with other steps. Kind of getting towards the end of my talk, I'm going to talk through how we generally approach this problem that I've been talking through. We'll talk about collection, extraction, and normalization. We do use ElasticON schema. I'll go into a little bit of that for those that might not be as familiar. Some of the enrichment we run automated analysis and then human. And then each step along the way, we'll kind of see that it builds on each other. So data collection, we've kind of talked through a few different scenarios and about a few different events, but there's a lot of big challenges with data collection. You have to anticipate your needs. You have to know what you need to collect. You have to worry about those architecture things that we talked about. Some collection can be automated, but particularly in a lot of these environments, sometimes you are just dealing with batch data. And so we've gotten really good. The screenshot here shows one example of some of the batch data we pulled in. We've gotten really good with dealing with batch data because sometimes we can't modify the environment to configure forwarding on it. Once you have that data, the quote unquote write data, which write can be arbitrary, you have to actually extract and normalize that. ElasticON schema allows you to overcome that gap between, hey, here's here's communication data in host logs versus here it is in network data. If you don't do this, this is really going to make life harder in the future steps. When you get into enrichment, this is where life does get harder if you didn't normalize your data in the past step. But you have to be able to take that data and normalize, pivot into it and enrich it. And so in enrichment, what we're showing here, actually here we're using the map feature in Kibana. We take things like location data through Shodan. GeoIP is another way of doing it. And what's nice with this is you can plug it into your visualizations to say, hey, let me start drawing geo boxes around regions for source or destination IPs. Enrichment can make or break your analysis here. And there's a lot more, we do a lot more enrichment, the IP address and vulnerabilities. There's a lot of other things like third-party enrichment services that we use to pull in, but this is where we save our analysts a whole lot of time. What we then do is actually run automated analysis through it. So we want to put our analysts on the problems that matter and the hard problems that we can't per se automate. So we'll automate parts of the analysis so they don't have to do it, so they can stay focused. Again, some might be API limited here due to licenses, but automated analysis saves us when we do get into human enriched. This is when we are actually digging through Kibana, pivoting through, finding the answer that we need to find. So in conclusion, people matter. So all of this and all of our experience with Elastic is to empower our people, because people grow when technology isn't in the way. Processes matter. Like I said, there's a lot you have to do with the data, and technology matters. There's always a lot of limitations for, or there's often a lot of limitations for how you do this. So where our journey ends, networks, or we shouldn't fear data volume, but better people, process, and technology protect life as we know it. So with that, let me know if you have any questions in the chat, or feel free to reach out, and thanks a lot.